In July 2017, CaribNation went to the Diaspora conference in Kingston, Jamaica. During that conference, we took the opportunity to have conversations with a number of individuals in Jamaica. One of these individuals, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Honorable PJ Patterson, whom we visited in his New Kingston office. During that conversation, Mr. Patterson shared with CaribNation his perspectives on a number of issues, including the initiation and the progress of engaging with the Jamaican diaspora by the Jamaican government, something he initiated in 2004 with the first diaspora conference in Kingston. He also shared with us his perspectives on CARICOM, regional integration, the pace at which it is progressing or not progressing, the current leadership within CARICOM to move this forward. We also talked about Brexit and the impact of Brexit on the Caribbean and a way forward in terms of dealing with the European Union. And he suggested that the ACP group of countries is the proper vehicle through which we can gain traction in dealing with Brexit. He also talked about a number of other issues, including Jamaica emerging as a sports mecca in the world for the future. Finally, we asked Mr. Patterson about his long-anticipated memoirs, and he assured us that it will be coming soon. All this and more on CaribNation up next. Here with the Most Honorable PJ Patterson, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, and Prime Minister Patterson, we are honored to be able to bring your views to the audience of CaribNation TV. And no better place to do it than here in Kingston, Jamaica, at a time when the Caribbean diaspora is meeting here in the Diaspora Conference, something you initiated during your term as Prime Minister in 2004. The presence of the diaspora here is also highly anticipated in terms of how we can effectively put in a mechanism to engage with the diaspora in a meaningful way. Can you just give us some brief comments on your initial idea and how you wish to see it go forward?
When I took the oath of office for the first time in March of 1992, I spoke of my vision for Jamaica as a land without borders, with, at that time, 2.5 million people living in Jamaica and 2.5 million living in the diaspora. Since then, the numbers would have grown slightly. My first step was to create within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade a unit that would work on how we would implement that idea. And it is as a consequence of that, we were able to have our first diaspora conference in Jamaica in 2004. I was able, although in retirement, to share in the closing stages of the last conference, which was held in Montego Bay. And I think it's timely that this conference, as Jamaica celebrates its 55th anniversary of independence, is taking place in our capital city. I think the conference would have two distinct objectives to achieve. Firstly, where have we got in terms of implementing the several decisions that were taken at the last meeting in Montego Bay? And very importantly, what's the way forward? How do we build on that which presently exists? Because, as you rightly mentioned, there's a need for the deepening and the entrenching of that relationship so that it can be of benefit to Jamaica and also of benefit to our Jamaicans living overseas.
You know, Mr. Prime Minister, there is still that feeling in the diaspora communities that most of the interest in the diaspora has to do with the $2+ billion a year remittances. We understand that lots of efforts have been taken under your leadership to more effectively engage, but there is still that gap, or at least there's a huge perception in the diaspora that there's a gap between what is said and what is done. And one of the things that bothers the diaspora to some extent is the lack of a minister that can focus almost full-time on engaging with the diaspora and helping to develop those mechanisms, like you had implemented way back when you had a Minister of State dedicated for that purpose. We no longer have that. And how do you see this going forward?
In so many things, and the diaspora is no exception, we do suffer somewhat from a implementation deficit. And I think there is now a full-fledged department dealing with that. I know a few years ago we had tried to establish a very closer relationship with the diaspora through a system of registration. And that was intended not only to know where people were, but also the skills that they had and the areas in which they wanted to make particular contributions. For some reason, that effort seems to have abated somewhat. I understand part of it was due to the reticence of some members in the diaspora to enter into a registration system, because not everyone is willing to share all the information about their situation. That notwithstanding, I regret that the effort was not pursued more intensely, because even if we hadn't gotten a full list of all the people, by now we would have known some of the skills which they have to offer. And the point has to be made that in these days of technology, not everybody has to be physically present on the rock to be able to make a development contribution to the rock. It is the case, however, that chapters of the diaspora and individuals of the diaspora, whether associated with church groups, their former schools, or the communities to which they belong, have been making significant and meaningful contributions in a variety of fields. And you have a number of cases where, particularly in health, one or two Jamaicans working in an institution have been able to convince their peers that it's worthwhile coming to Jamaica to volunteer to engage in some aspect of healthcare, ranging from dentistry to ophthalmology to specialized surgery. They've been making a tremendous difference, and it's highly appreciated. Now, one understands why the perception exists that the only interest or the principal interest is in terms of the remittances. I don't think anybody who has seriously looked at what the diaspora could contribute would have that myopic view. But how to make the partnership more real, more meaningful, requires some consideration and further deliberations on both sides. I know in the minds of many people, the question of the right to vote seems to be the preoccupation. I would point out that it's a very complex issue, and it needs thorough examination both within the diaspora and within the government. And in fact, when I say within the government, since it would be bound to entail some serious revisions of the Constitution, it has to be more than the government. It has to be a bipartisan process, and it has to go beyond that.
To the people.
It has to go to the people. But that does mean that work on it shouldn't commence and shouldn't proceed with, I would say, a combination of caution, but a combination that also some element of urgency, because the thing has got to be settled in one way or the other.
But I'd like to say, based on my experiences in the diaspora, at least in the United States, is that it's not a large percentage of the diaspora that is advocating for vote.
I realize that.
It's a small group, but
Yes.
they're vocal.
Yes.
And so usually you hear them, but most people you talk with on this, they're really not very much interested. What some of them are saying, who are not looking for votes, are saying that perhaps the government could open up some positions on some of the boards in Jamaica for diaspora membership. And again, you mentioned the impediments in the Constitution, in particular with vote, but also in other areas as well.
Well, in terms of membership on boards, I don't think there's any constitutional impediment.
Right.
I think it would be a question of how do you get the actual involvement,
Right.
the attendance at meetings. Some things you can use the modern means of communication without requiring a presence. Certainly when we have agencies that are operating abroad, the tourist board probably being the best example, there is no reason why there can't be some closer relationship between the tourist boards where they are located and the diaspora communities in which they are situated. And I would think that at different times, embassies and high commissions have been working closely with representatives of the diaspora in matters which affect the interests of the diaspora and in matters where the Jamaican government and people have an interest in mobilizing diaspora support to pursue particular causes in the countries in which they are located. Let's take, for example, the problem that has now loomed large, of which you are well aware, having to do with correspondent banking.
Absolutely.
That is a primary case where we would need members of the diaspora to join in the lobbying efforts to reverse a decision which is inimical to us both. You in the diaspora, you want to make sure that whatever funds you invest in Jamaica are part of a system that is integrated into the banking system of the developed countries. So I think the practical areas which can be identified, some of which were mentioned at the last conference in Montego Bay. And that's why I said this conference should be looking at what has happened to those decisions.
Here's one of the problems. Information sharing with the diaspora is lacking. And there's no question about that. And that needs to be improved. On this particular issue of correspondent banking, there are some of us in the diaspora who are quite familiar with the issue and do whatever we can. But the vast majority of the diaspora know nothing about it.
They wouldn't.
You see? And unless you're in a particular field or a particular type of business, you wouldn't know what's going on with correspondent banking.
There's another matter which is looming. I don't know if it is going to see the light of legislative day, but it is the threat, and I use the word advisedly, to extract from remittances a certain portion to build a wall. And for the life of me, I can't see what could be the justification for people sending money to the Caribbean to be asked or forced to pay any portion of those remittances for the building of a wall that has nothing whatsoever to do with them. I have been a very consistent person, both in government and without and outside. And particularly after my engagement in a Commonwealth study on migration flows, to insist that governments must recognize remittances are not their money. They mustn't touch it. And that's where I think lobbying is important, because this is something which directly affects every member of the diaspora that is sending money home.
And it affects the receiving countries, because
it certainly does.
It very well could reduce by that 2%
It
tax.
is bound to.
Yeah. I want to switch our conversation a little bit to CARICOM. And the reason for that is there's a perception, and probably it's real, that CARICOM is floundering. And there is some lack of leadership in CARICOM that we had grown accustomed to over the years that may not be present at the moment. What do you think is going on, and how do you think we could get CARICOM, in particular Caribbean integration and so on, moving at a much quicker pace than it has been moving?
The present administration, led by Prime Minister Holness, commissioned a study by a group chaired by former Prime Minister Bruce Golding to look at what CARICOM means to Jamaica and what can Jamaica contribute to making CARICOM an instrument, a vehicle that can move Jamaica forward. The report is now before the Cabinet, and of course, until it is released to Parliament, one is unable to speak about its contents. However, I thought the Prime Minister of Jamaica gave a pretty clear and strong signal by his contribution at the last conference in Grenada, when he spoke about helping to make the single market a reality, and the steps that need to be taken with some urgency, difficult though the process is, towards a single economy. The latter is by no means an easy step. There's another issue which I think once again provides a very welcome opportunity. I would say provides an obligation for us to work together very closely. And it's the decision taken by the United Kingdom to Brexit. One of the things that contributed to the success which CARICOM achieved in its earlier days came from our uniting to negotiate the Lomé and subsequently the Cotonou agreements. Once again, we have to take a common position. We have an existing agreement with the European Union. We will need to have an agreement with the United Kingdom. That's opening up new opportunities. To just name one example, is there once again some window for increasing Commonwealth trade? So I think the CARICOM leaders and ministers have to look at what are the urgent issues. How do we address them in the world of today? How do we pool our collective skills? One of the reasons why we succeeded in Lomé to the extent that we did went beyond the ministers and the political leadership, important though that was. But the quality of our technical work was superb. It was highly appreciated and admired by our colleagues from Africa and the Pacific countries. And at times, we were able to show the European that anything they could do, we could do better.
That's right.
So the nurturing of those skills and combining them for the advance of the region must be of paramount importance to us at this time. We also have to look at areas like education, health, the whole question of human resource development. We've taken some very meaningful steps. If I may say so, our regional university, which is about to celebrate its 70th year of existence, is about to launch in what for the university is a new field of endeavor, but an area where we have excelled over the years.
Yes.
It's proposing to establish a faculty of sports. I believe that will be the start of trying to build not just the creative skills and talents that we have in the field of sports, but all in all the ancillary areas: sports medicine, sports litigation, sports management. I believe that, I've said it before, the Caribbean, which is dependent on tourism, increasingly so, should be a mecca for sports.
You know, you've touched on so many really important and relevant points. I wish we had all day to talk about these. But before we end, I know you're working on your memoirs. You're working on, and it is so highly anticipated. We just can't wait. Are there going to be any surprises?
I don't know. I'm simply going to narrate some of my experiences and some of my influences, and perhaps indicate some of the things which motivated me to do what I did, when I did, and how I did it.
And we do hope that after that book is published, we'll be able to come back and talk to you again, and maybe have you up in Washington.
Let's hope so.
And do some breakdown.
I think everybody who's listening this would know that I am always very happy, pleased, and comfortable to be visiting and in the presence and company of my brothers and sisters in the diaspora, and that has not abated.
Mr. Patterson, thank you so much for sitting down with CaribNation TV. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.